I've never done a free-to-play video on any of the event exclusive clans. This is usually because the triple rare slots are given to the boss monsters, which means we don't have a boss monster for these free-to-play decks. That now changes with the new Megacolony event, because we now have a pretty bitchin' like double rare in the grade 3 slot. That unit being the machining stag beetle. What's really cool about this is it introduces kind of the archetype stuff into global now. What that means is he synergizes with cards that share a similar name to him. In this case, it being machining. Machining stag beetle's ability is that when he is ridden, you can then call 2 machinings from your soul. They are tapped, but then he gains their total sum in power. So he kind of establishes the goal of the deck in that he gives us plussing, and then we use units like Megacolony Battler B to then paralyze stuff to then slow the opponent down. So as we are paralyzing their units, slowing them down, we are then using stuff like Stag Beetle to then speed ourselves up in like card economy. Paralyzing is in a way Lock Light from Link Joker. Paralyzing just kind of freezes our opponent's rear guards. They cannot stand and they cannot move. They can be placed on top of, but in those cases, we are technically minusing our opponent. The negative thing about paralyzing is it doesn't really synergize with the way Zero works. You can't paralyze an opponent's grade 2 because you have to get past the grade 2 to deal damage to them. So turning off an entire column is a little bit harder in Zero. So we will be typically targeting stuff in their back row to turn off their boosters. With that said, if they do have a grade 3 in the front row, this is where we can really capitalize on paralyzing, because then we can paralyze their grade 3 in the front row, which means if they want that column to attack, they're gonna have to minus. When you initially read Stag Beetle though, the units coming in tapped don't really allow us to push with them though. So the plussing isn't really a plus until the next turn. This is where our Worker Ant starter comes in. So he does not have Forerunner, so that means when you ride him, he stays in the soul. He then has the ability that when he is placed by Stag Beetle, you can then stand one of your machining units. So to make an archetype deck work, you have to play the majority of the deck being in that archetype, in this case being machining. So I'm playing 9 other machining units, including our starter Worker Ant. That means we will have a very likely chance that we will have a second card in our soul when Stag Beetle is ridden. Since you want machinings in your soul, our ride targets will typically be the machining units. For the grade 1 slot, I am playing the Machining Hornet, and in the grade 2 slot, I'm playing Machining Mantis. Both of them have the same ability that when they are placed, if you have another machining unit in your soul, they get a plus 3k. This is kind of nice because that means if you ride a unit that is not machining, but you have another machining in the soul, they will still be a 12k or 10k attacker. In Hornet's case, he is a 10k booster on place, which is really nice. And then the final machining unit I'm playing is Armor Beetle. When I first looked at him, I was really confused why people were running him. He has the ability that when he is placed, you can put another rearguard into your soul and then paralyze an opponent's unit. When I first read that, I didn't really like it because it's like, it's not even a 1-for-1 because you're technically not retiring your opponent's unit. You're just freezing it for a turn. However, after playing the deck, he allows for some really interesting combos and extensions for the deck. I'll talk about that like later on. Something that was pointed out to me was when you were doing all this paralyzing, that means your opponent will not have boosters typically, which means it's going to be harder for our opponent to be able to hit over big butts, which means having our 10k body with Bloody Hercule is a lot more viable. I'm also playing the 8k vanilla just as like kind of a nice booster and attacker at really weak interceptors. And then to fill in the grade 2 slot, I'm playing 1 Water Gang. He's just a Libra clone. Besides our Worker B, we don't really use any counterblast. So having just this kind of free draw is kind of nice. I don't think you should really increase his ratio though. I'd rather be using my counterblast for paralyzing than plussing because Stag Beetle can do that without using any counterblast. One really nice thing about Megacolony is that we have a clone of that one Shadow Paladin unit that when they are placed, you can then call the top card of your deck. Since they are a guaranteed hit, it is a free +1. So I really like playing them as a 4 of. And then to fill in the grade 3 slot, you can kind of play whatever else you want. I am playing 1 of the Hell Spider. He is kind of like a decent like backup ride if you really have to, because he is a 13k attacker if all our opponent stuff is rested. And he can paralyze on place for a counterblast of 2. I would play him more, but the counterblast 2 can get a little heavy later on, so then he just becomes a 10k vanilla on rearguard. And in those cases, I'd much rather be playing Lady Butterfly, which is a 12k attacker. She is really useful because one of our biggest lines of play is if we're going first and we go for our turn 3 play where we ride Stag Beetle, there is a chance that our opponent will not have any interceptors in the front row on this turn. So in those cases, we can have our, let's say, Armor Beetle off to the right because Stag Beetle called him out. He then swings at their Vanguard. Lady Butterfly, if boosted, can then swing at their Vanguard. Stag Beetle, being huge, usually like 24k, will then be a third hit. So because Lady Butterfly's in the deck, we have an easier time dealing 3 damage to them in that turn. With those like lucky aggressive turns, that's why I'm playing the 4 crit instead of 9 draws. 9 draws makes the deck like really consistent because like 9 crit, like it does help the deck have like a lot of pressure, but you still need a little bit of draw because like Stag Beetle can't like do all the carrying. Like the draws like really help you just get the resources you need on top of Vesper. So having the crits on those turns where you swing in with only your Vanguard are really helpful. Going back to what I said earlier, my favorite line of play to do with the deck is the Armor Beetle and Ant combo, which in a way gives us a free paralyze. What I mean by that is when you ride Stag Beetle, you then call out Armor Beetle and Ant from the Soul. You then activate Ant, which then allows you to stand Armor Beetle. Armor Beetle will then put our Ant back into the Soul, paralyzing our opponent's unit. Since Ant was rested, we don't really care of putting it back in the Soul, so we did get to paralyze for free. And now that Ant is back in the Soul, this means that our Mantis and our Hornet have a guaranteed other unit in the Soul, so they will still be able to get their plus 3k. And then later on in the game, on turn 4, turn 5, whatever, if we ever have to re-ride Stag Beetle to get some advantage, we have another Ant in the Soul. Because having to re-ride Stag Beetle without Ant in the Soul is kind of pointless because the units being tapped don't really give us any form of pressure on the board. So Armor Beetle giving us that recursion of using Ant is very useful. Other budget options for the deck. It's really cool because Machining has access to this completely other build that includes the Toxin Squad. This involves Toxic Trooper and Toxic Soldier. Both have the ability that they can ignore interceptors. This does mean if you only have one of them out, it's going to deal the same amount of damage, which is 1. However, if you have 2 units from the Toxic Squad out, then you are capable of dealing 2 damage in a turn, which is kind of normal for other clans, but Megacolony doesn't have any other way of doing that. So playing the Toxic version allows us to get like some kind of cool cheesy wins. It does feel not very consistent though, because there's going to be a lot of turns where you want to like hold on to the Toxic Soldiers because just playing one feels like a waste. But sometimes that's inefficient playing because like you need the Interceptor, you need the booster. So the only Machining unit I'm not playing is Mosquito, and that's because he has the ability that when he's placed you get a Soul Charge one, and I don't like that. I feel like the synergy they were going for here was that Stag Beetle uses the Soul, but it's very specific Soul, while Mosquito is random soul charging. Maybe if we had a deck variant where it was 100% machining, I could maybe see play with this. But currently, since like half the deck is not machining, I don't really see a use for it. I think the grade 2 Giraffa is like really cool. It can paralyze for free, and you don't even need to play the other Giraffa Ride Chain, which is like really bad. The only thing I don't like about him is that he only works on Vanguard, and we want machining units in our Soul, and I'd much rather have something like Armor Beetle on Vanguard so that when we do the Stag Beetle turn, that we get the free plussing, because calling out a grade 1 and a grade 0 machining doesn't feel as good as calling out a free Interceptor. And another unit I was kind of looking at was the Master Fraud unit. When he hits anything, you can Soul Blast 3 and draw a card. I was originally kind of looking at it because I thought I was going to be playing more Mosquitoes, and I was like, oh, we'll have like some free soul. The bad thing is you can never activate a Master Fraud the same game that you activate a Stag Beetle. So upgrades for the deck, I recommend just ignoring Giraffa just because like the retiring is not very good. You have to retire your own stuff, like, and you can only retire their back row. So like just, it's not good. Just ignore that. I do really recommend you play Master Beetle. Master Beetle is very good for the deck. While in Limit Break, when he attacks, not hits, attacks, you can counterblast 1 and paralyze 2 of our opponent's units. This is crazy because if using only one of our resources, which is our 1 counterblast, we can then turn off possibly 2 of our opponent's swings, paralyzing their units. What's really cool is he kind of synergizes with Machining, because if we ride Machining before we are at Limit Break, get our pluses that we want, and then ride Master Beetle afterwards, then it doesn't feel weird riding Master Beetle earlier on in the game when we're not at limit break. So we now have 2 riot targets that we really like, and one of them has an 11k butt. Now, going up against the meta, like I said, this is like Link Joker light, so anything that Link Joker demolishes, Megacolony can kind of play against. So something like Aqua Force, paralyzing units like Basil or Diamantes can just like turn off their plays, not allowing them to get to their 4th wave. So my final thoughts for the deck is I brought this to every tournament match that's happened since the 2 weekends this game has come out, and I've got a lot of wins. Not 3 in a row. I haven't got any invitations with it, but I won more games than I thought I was going to. Adding Master Beetle can really help add this deck's consistency up, but Stag Beetle is where the pressure comes in and the advantage. And I really think that it's a really strong variant of the deck that you can play right away. I'm not a big fan of bugs personally. Maybe that's why like it took me so long to like pull my playset of PGs and Stag Beetles. But like the play style of like paralyzing units is something I've never got to play with before. And like the possibility of just turning off a column is like pretty cool. It feels fair though compared to something like Lock, because like worst case scenarios your opponent just like calls on top of it, which means like the deck kind of loses advantage in that way, because like your opponent can just like ignore what you just spent your whole turn doing, if that makes sense. A part of the advantage of them is paralyzing stuff in the front row. Since we can't paralyze grade 2s because you have to swing into them anyway, it just feels like they lose like half their strength, which was already quite low to begin with. I think if you've been waiting for Link Joker this whole time, just warm up with Megacolony. If you look into the sun long enough and then stare at your screen, they might look like Link Joker. But I hate the dude that plays them. I forget his name, but like every time he yells, I just like I cringe a little bit. If you want to support me, feel free to buy some Triple Rare stickers. I'd really appreciate it. I never know how to end these. That's all I got.